Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Our program is about to begin. They're getting there. Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Please find your seats. Our program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kent Emerson, the president of the Empire Club, to the stage.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the Sheraton Centre Hotel in downtown Toronto, welcome to the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you joining us through either our webcast or podcast, welcome to the meeting. The Empire Club has been at the forefront of the greatest debates influencing Canadians since 1903, the very first of which was perhaps the most existential. How should Canada protect itself from manifest destiny from the United States? It's actually true. Since then, there have been more passionate debates. Should Canadians fly the Union Jack or produce the Canadian flag? Should we patriate into a Canadian constitution and have a charter? Should Canada implement free trade with the U.S.? Should I vote yes or no to the Meech Lake Accord? Can Quebec be allowed to secede from Canada? Should Canada legalize same-sex marriage? What is the role of Canadians as peacekeepers? And should the Canadian military engage in Iraq and Afghanistan? These are but a few examples of the historical debates that have played out on the Empire Club's podium. As we look forward, one topic has dominated much of our nation's public discourse: climate change. It is arguably the most important and complex issue of our time. We all remember the 2008 federal election being fought over the green shift, and a decade later, cap and trade was a central issue throughout the last provincial campaign. Recently, the United Nations report on climate change has put a timeline to act on climate change front and center into the conversation. Some of you may have heard our today's speaker discuss this report with Matt Galloway last week. The reality is that Canadians appear to be increasingly divided when it comes to the question of how to respond to climate change. And that chasm seems to grow and become even more complex when you add in carbon pricing. We see this divide displayed no more clearly than on the national political stage, where many federal and provincial leaders champion very different approaches to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Our speaker today represents one of those provincial governments that fundamentally opposes Ottawa's plans to proceed with a carbon tax in Ontario and in other provinces that don't have a carbon pricing system that meets the federal criteria. As with countless other debates, the Empire Club remains committed to offering its podium to different points of view, to foster meaningful and engaging dialogue. That is why we have Minister Rod Phillips here today. And Minister, we appreciate you choosing our podium at such an important time. And that's why on December 6th, we will also welcome our Federal Environment Minister, the Honourable Catherine McKenna, to speak at the Arcadian Court. I'm sure all of you are aware that the Ontario government has announced a Maiden solution that will replace the previous cap and trade program. Minister Phillips, we are eager to know more details on this plan and your thoughts on protecting the environment from many challenges that we face. The Honourable Rod Phillips was sworn in as Minister on June 29, 2018. Minister Phillips chose to serve as an elected representative following a successful business career. Most recently, he was Chair of Afiniti Canada, a global artificial intelligence company, and Postmedia, Canada's largest news media company. I first met Minister Phillips in his role as the former president and CEO of Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, where he is known to be a hard worker and a steady hand. He also served at Shepell.fgi, a Canadian-based international employee health company. He's been a volunteer of CivicAction. The minister, not without extensive political experience, has also served as Chief of Staff in the offices of then Minister of Labour Elizabeth Whitmer and former Toronto Mayor Mel Lastman. Born in Newmarket, Minister Phillips has an Honours BA in Political Science and English from the University of Western Ontario and an MBA from Wilfrid Laurier. I'd like to give a warm welcome to the stage for the Member of Parliament for Ajax and Ontario's Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks, the Honourable Rod Phillips.
Thank you very much, Kent. And it is is great to have the opportunity here to speak at the Empire Club. Great to be here on behalf of Doug Ford and his new Ontario government. And it is humbling, I have to say, to be at this podium. And that says something because, as at least Kent knows, I'm a former president of the Canadian Club. So I say that appropriately. As he mentioned, this is a podium from which many of the great issues of our time and times before have been discussed and debated. And the people, the leaders in those days spoke passionately to their views, and that's something that I'll try to do today as well. I am encouraged to hear that the federal minister, Minister McKenna, will be gracing this podium. I may even, ask for a front row seat. It's interesting, one of the things we could do that too. One of the things that has been interesting, of course, as a newly minted politician, has been the chance to get to know the various other ministers of the environment, and I had a little bit of a Twitter storm after my meeting with Minister McKenna. She was very kind to come and visit me in the office within about 3 weeks of me getting the job, and it turned out, I said, we don't really know each other, Minister, but I'm pretty sure our parents aren't getting along, so I'm not sure we're going to get along awfully well. But anyway, I do hope that you come out and listen, because I think this is a very important discussion. Today, I am going to talk about the important role that the Ontario government will play in delivering on a commitment we've made to protect the environment, to make sure that we protect that fundamental part of Ontario, which is our pristine environment. I am going to talk about the Maiden Ontario plan that we will be releasing next month, and talk about the development of that plan and where it's at in terms of our consultation with Ontarians. And perhaps predictably, I'm going to speak as well about why we so strongly oppose the federal government's intentions, or stated intentions, to impose a carbon tax on Ontario and 3 other provinces. Before I get going, it is interesting. I mentioned I am a new MPP. As Kent mentions, my background was in business before that, but a little bit in politics. And so people ask you, what's the thing you do, or what's the important bit of feedback that you keep getting from your constituents? And it's interesting. What I've decided they like the most is frankly that they see us working. I don't know what they thought we were doing otherwise, but one thing about our Premier, Doug Ford, is that he's kept us very busy. As you know, we've had summer sittings, we've had midnight sittings, and I'm pretty sure people are just happy to see politicians at work doing anything. So far, that seems to be the key to success. Just show up for work and be seen to be doing some kind of work. I don't know what that says about the last folks. When I talk to people, and a little bit just on our government before I delve into the environment, when I talk to people and they tell me the things that really stand out of this government are really 2. The first is the speed at which we are doing things, and the second is the commitment we're showing to follow through on our initiatives. I believe what you'll find is that there are really 3 overarching objectives when you look at our government and you look at our priorities, and those objectives will play through the entire mandate that we have. The first objective is around improving affordability for families. The choices we make and the commitments that we undertake are engineered to address this understanding that it has gotten very, very expensive for many Ontario families to live in this province. We want to make Ontario a more affordable place to work, to live, and to raise a family. In that vein, there's a number of actions we've already taken. I introduced Bill 4, which was the bill that will repeal the previous government's Cap and Trade Act, which we saw as ineffective and expensive. That bill is currently in third reading and will likely pass soon. This early decisive action on repealing cap and trade has already reduced gas prices, reduced diesel prices, reduced home heating prices. I've also canceled another expensive and ineffective program, the Drive Clean program, which I've come to recognize will probably be the most popular thing I ever do when I'm in government. So Drive Clean, as you all would know, was inconveniencing millions of Ontarians to no effect and costing the taxpayers $40 million. And of course, we are replacing it with a program that targets more aggressive polluters in diesel trucks. My colleague, Greg Rickford, the Minister of Energy, Northern Developments and Mines, has introduced legislation to scrap the Wasteful Green Energy Act. That will save $790 million and start to bring down hydro rates. The Transportation Minister, who's our colleague, John Yakabutsky, has frozen driver's licenses and other fees. And again, this is just the beginning. We really are focused on addressing this core objective I mentioned about affordability. A second objective is increasing our province's competitiveness. Now, we're going to create an environment. Our objective is to create an environment that increases the opportunities for Ontarians by making our businesses more competitive. Last week, the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, Jim Wilson, along with Laurie Scott, Minister of Labour, and Marilee Fulton, Minister of Training, Colleges and Universities, introduced the Making Ontario Open for Business Act. This will reduce red tape, unlock thousands of well-paying jobs in the skilled trades, and repeal the very worst parts of Bill 148 that was burdening Ontario business. But to be a competitive province, we also have to have competitive finances for our province, our provincial government. And that's why our President of the Treasury Board, Minister Bethan Falvey, who is kind enough to join us today, has conducted a thorough line-by-line audit of every element of the provincial budget. Peter, how many lines was there?
500,000 we did in a few weeks.
500,000 lines of expenditures. This, ladies and gentlemen, is vital work that we need to do to be able to now move forward and put Ontario on a solid footing and therefore put our province on a competitive footing. The third objective is restoring balance. A balanced, pragmatic approach, which you should see applied across many of the decisions that we make as a provincial government. For me, as the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks, this really takes the form of managing and understanding and then implementing policies and programs that balance the very important priorities of a healthy environment with a healthy economy. So these overriding objectives will be our beacons. They will be what we look to, and I think as folks who are good enough to come out to luncheon speeches and wonder what's going on in government, you should expect us to be responding to those three priorities: affordability for families, competitiveness for business, and restoring balance when looking at any of our policies. Now, those who work and live in Ontario and call it home couldn't ask for a better place. The quality of life that we enjoy does rely very much on our environment, on clean air, on clean water, on clean and safe lands and parks. Our government is committed to protecting Ontario we know and ensuring that our pristine wilderness, our pristine environment is preserved not just for this generation, but for the future. That's why we'll be coming out next month with a new Maiden, Ontario Environment Plan. The plan will be suited to the specific needs of our province and designed to ensure that we protect and conserve our land, air, and water, that we address urban litter and waste, that we build resilience to the impacts of climate change, in particular to severe weather, and that we do our part to continue to reduce greenhouse gases. At the same time, our government for the people is committed to protecting the environment in a responsible, balanced way, one that respects taxpayers and helps grow the economy. Our air, our water, our land, our homes, our infrastructure, all of those things are all very much subject to the changes that are happening as a result of climate change. We are seeing more frequent storms, resulting in flooded basements, cost to employees, cost to municipalities, cost to businesses. If you look at the insured losses suffered in Ontario just this year, you get a good sense of the picture that we're all looking at. In February, a storm caused more than $46 million of damage in Brantford, Cambridge, London, and the GTA. In April, a storm in southern Ontario resulted in over $80 million in costs. The winds and rains that hit Hamilton and the Greater Toronto Area led to $500 million in cost. And that was the biggest storm since the billion-dollar flood in 2013 that cost Toronto $1 billion. In August, the rains in Toronto cost $80 million in damage, and of course, not that long ago, we all remember the very devastating pictures from the tornado in Ottawa. These events disrupt our communities, they threaten our health and safety, and they cost our families, not only in terms of out-of-pocket costs, but also in higher insurance premiums. Climate change is a reality, and our environmental legacy will to be the largest extent measured by our ability to adapt and our ability to avoid the very worst consequences of what is happening. But of course, to confront these challenges, we cannot be expected to do it alone. Just last week, the Prime Minister, who I don't quote that often, the Prime Minister stated that if Canada stopped everything tomorrow and other countries didn't have any solutions, it wouldn't make a big difference. And of course, I agree with the Prime Minister. After all, Canadian emissions count for 1.6% of global emissions, and Ontario counts for roughly a third, just a little less than a third of that. And that's given that Ontario has 40% of the country's population. So Ontario has, in fact, been a leader on climate change. The closure of the first coal-fired electricity generating plants was initiated by a previous Progressive Conservative government and then completed by subsequent governments. This has been the single biggest reduction in greenhouse gases, not just in Ontario, but for Canada. The numbers speak for themselves. Since 2000, while Canada's total emissions have declined by 1.5%, Ontario's have declined by 20%. Since 2005, while Canada's emissions have increased by 3%, Ontario's have declined by 22%. This is why Ontario is in fact on track to meet our share of the Paris 2020 targets. The combination of nuclear, hydro, and other renewables has given Ontario one of the cleanest electricity grids in North America, and that's good news. But while Ontario has been making progress on reducing greenhouse gases and on other environmental initiatives, this has come at a cost. These decisions have forced families and businesses to struggle with some of the highest electricity charges in North America. The people of Ontario are stretched very thin, some to the breaking point. In giving us a mandate to govern, the people of Ontario made it clear that they could not afford Kathleen Wynne's cap-and-trade program. They also made it clear that they would not afford Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. I heard clearly from my constituents in Ajax who are having trouble getting the bills paid. Hardworking families who have to every day make difficult choices about what they're going to do and their priorities based in large measure by charges associated with power. They are frustrated, and they are particularly frustrated anytime they watch their hard-earned dollars be frittered away with programs that are not effective and policies that don't work. So we will do better for Ontarians. Since coming to office, we've taken fast action to begin the process of righting the ship and putting Ontario on a more sustainable path to deal with our environmental challenges while respecting taxpayers. This has meant eliminating ineffective policies like the previous government's cap-and-trade program. Now, the orderly, transparent wind-down of cap-and-trade will benefit all Ontarians. The Financial Accountability Office confirmed that it is real action that will save families $264 a year. Ending cap-and-trade translates into direct savings at the pumps. Gas prices are now 4.3% cheaper. Diesel, 5.7% cheaper. Natural gas bills will be reduced on average by $80 per family, $280 for a small business. The estimated savings in 2019 alone are $1.9 billion to the economy, and this will support creating 8,300 new jobs by 2021. So in short, ending cap-and-trade in Ontario means lower costs for businesses and more disposable income for our families. However, just as we're making significant strides to provide relief to taxpayers, the federal government last week indicated that it was going to proceed with its plans to impose a carbon tax on Ontario and 3 other provinces. This despite growing opposition to the federal government's plan. In fact, we now have a majority of provinces standing in opposition to the federal government. In his announcement, the Prime Minister claimed that he sought to punish polluters in provinces that didn't have a plan. Yet both Manitoba and Saskatchewan have a plan. They have a detailed plan with real targets. They have thoughtful proposals that will make significant reductions in greenhouse gases. They don't lack a plan, they lack a tax. In reality, when the Prime Minister says he wants a plan, what he's saying is he insists on a tax that will charge you more to heat your home, a tax that will cost you more to feed your family, and a tax that will drive up the price when you fill up your car. The Prime Minister is not punishing polluters. The Prime Minister is punishing commuters. In Ajax, it's moms and dads who need to pick up their kids from school or want to take them to hockey. It's seniors who need to get across town for their doctor's appointment. A punitive carbon tax does not acknowledge the simple realities of daily life for Ontario families, most of whom rely on their vehicles. These are the polluters that the Prime Minister is intent on punishing. And while we've heard promises about tax returns, it's really hard to find any Canadians that believe that at the end of the day, a higher tax is going to put more money in their pockets. But for those who are willing to accept this, for those who believe the promise that the check's in the mail just before the next election, it does raise a perplexing question, particularly for carbon tax proponents. Those who advocate for carbon tax do so in pursuit of behavior change. The concept is simple. If something costs more, you'll use less of it. The higher the price of gas, the less driving you'll do. Now, putting aside the challenge to the reality of most people's daily lives, I ask you, if you believe that the federal carbon tax will financially benefit Canadians, if you believe that most of us will have more money in our pockets, then where is the motivation for behavior change? Why should we do anything differently? Further, economists tell us that to be effective, a carbon tax would have to be in the range of $150 per ton. Just to put that in context, when we shut down cap and trade, the program was just under $20 a ton. But to change consumer behavior, economists have been clear. A carbon tax would need to be $150 a ton. Now, while Justin Trudeau's plan would see gas prices rise by 11 cents a litre, that's only $50 a ton. So the carbon tax that would actually work for economists would see, just to take one example, gasoline prices rise by nearly 35 cents a litre. This is just one reason that we believe carbon tax is a non-starter for Ontarians. It's an approach we don't think will work, and it's an approach that Ontario families simply cannot afford. That's why we're fighting the carbon tax in the courts, and that's why we're supporting Saskatchewan in their fight. You might have seen that today Premier Ford and Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, got together to talk about a number of things. Just to show you how serious this is for Premier Moe. I don't know if you saw the press conference, but he said he would rather cheer for the Toronto Maple Leafs than cheer for a carbon tax. And that's something for a premier from Saskatchewan. As well, tomorrow, Premier Ford will be meeting with Andrew Scheer, the leader of the official opposition in Ottawa, to talk about the same, to talk about our plans to oppose the federal carbon tax. But it's not just Conservative leaders that are opposing this carbon tax. It's the NDP government in Alberta. It's the Liberal government in PEI. It's anyone who understands that this is not an effective program, that it actually masks the issue because it's some kind of silver bullet that's supposed to make us all feel like we're doing something, but that it's also something that families, not just in Ontario, but in 6 other provinces, can't afford. Now, Ontario has been asking since August to sit down with the federal government, to sit down and talk about our plan, to talk about setting targets, to talk about how we together can approach our mutual objective. We assume it's our mutual objective, which is reducing greenhouse gases. Their response has been silence. Now, happily, that's going to end next month, and they'll be unable to ignore us because we have a meeting on November 24th with all of the environment ministers from across the country, and we'll be getting together in Ottawa. So I think you can count on the fact that at that meeting, very much a part of the debate is going to be how can the federal government choose to impose a plan when the majority of provinces don't agree with their approach? This is an important issue. We all agree on the problem, but why are they being so dogmatic? I remember the minister particularly hated it when I called her dogmatic. But why are they being so dogmatic about their solution? And why are they not considering the relative starting places of provinces like Ontario, who have, as I've pointed out, made significant contributions and whose citizens are continuing to pay for those contributions? Now, however, despite the lack of federal leadership we need, we do remain committed to bringing forward a real and positive plan, and we'll bring forward that plan next month. It'll be a comprehensive plan. It'll certainly deal with the issues of climate change. It'll also begin to address important issues like waste, important issues like air quality and water quality. But it'll be principally focused out of the gate on what we will do to be reducing emissions and what we'll be doing to prepare Ontario and Ontarians for the real effects of climate change. In the preparation of our plan, we've already met with over 100 stakeholders from across the province, and those meetings continue as we speak. We've had very important discussions with the New York Green Bank, those responsible for Australia's reverse GHG auctions, the Britain's Carbon Fund, and a number of other very informed groups, both in Canada and globally, who have had success at reducing greenhouse gases. These discussions with leaders in Canada and around the globe are the kind of contributions that we need to create that Made in Ontario plan. And of course, we only find them with a broad-based consultation. That is why a few weeks ago, I issued an invitation to the public to submit their ideas and suggestions. And so far, you'll be happy to hear, we've had more than 1,500 suggestions from Ontarians. Very thoughtful approaches. People who understand the pragmatic reality of needing to balance the economy and the environment. But very helpful suggestions, and we're about halfway through that process, so we'll continue to collect those ideas. Now, to give you a little bit of a sampling about what people are telling us, I can tell you that they are very keen to be a part of this discussion. And as you'd expect with people from Ontario, they're not shy about telling us what they want. They want us to, of course, make sure that we conserve resources and energy and use it wisely. They want to understand the risks of extreme weather and the risks that it poses to their communities, to their homes, to their families, so that they can be prepared. They want a government that spends money wisely, doesn't duplicate the efforts of others. Rather, they'd like us to work collaboratively to get better results. They're proud of doing their part and want recognition for what they've achieved. And yes, they do want polluters to pay, but not with penalizing targets that will make them uncompetitive globally and cost Ontario jobs in the process. Our new plan will lay out a government's vision for the future of environmental action. Ontario needs a comprehensive risk assessment to start that allows all of us to understand the impacts of climate change on infrastructure, communities, and our homes. Ontario will need to use innovative technologies, particularly to conserve energy, recognizing that conservation remains one of the most efficient ways to reduce greenhouse gases. Ontario needs to ensure that emissions-intensive industries are held accountable, while at the same time acknowledging that Ontario-based companies have to compete in a global economy. And Ontario, of course, deserves a government that leads by example, not a government that says, do what I say, but do what I do. And then a government that will actually lead so that those that we are also asking to come along with us will see that we are committed to the outcome as well. Our balanced plan will address these issues and invest in an Ontario emissions fund that will leverage private sector dollars with provincial dollars to ensure that Ontario gets the best value for money. We'll stand with the people of our province and acknowledge how much has already been accomplished while we commit to Ontario's share in terms of continuing to reduce greenhouse gas. Now, the consultation is ongoing, and so anybody who's interested, I'd suggest you to go to the website, ontario.ca/climate change. Following the release of our plan next month, I'm fully committed to working with municipalities, stakeholders, businesses, with all Ontarians to make sure that the implementation of our plan is one that makes sense for people and that's effective in the long run in our objectives of preparing Ontarians to be more resilient and reducing greenhouse gas. Now, our current environmental challenges do provide us with really poignant opportunities to transform how we use environmental safeguards to protect the environment, but how we do so in such a way that supports and even enhances our competitiveness as a jurisdiction. Not through an unproven magic bullet solution, a carbon tax that's supposed to fix everything, but through a straightforward plan that people can understand, something that's built from the ground up with the objective of reducing greenhouse gases and preparing the people of Ontario. In Ontario, we've moved beyond the days where a high-tax government with a highly interventionist sentiment is going to dictate everything that every business and everyone has to do. We've moved beyond government-heavy solutions that involve government in every aspect of people's lives and take away the initiative from businesses and from individuals to lead healthy, productive lives, and we believe to help grow the economy. The solutions that we are going to deliver are going to, back to the beginning, the solutions that we are going to deliver are really going to deliver on three things. They're going to make life more affordable here in the province of Ontario for our families. They're also going to make our businesses more competitive so that the people of Ontario have the opportunities that they deserve. And they are going to deliver on that balance, protecting the environment and protecting the economy, dealing with climate change, but dealing with it in a way that ensures that our province can continue to be one of the leading places where people want to live, work, and raise a family. Thank you very much for your time.
So the minister is going to take a Q&A session now. So I'm going to call everyone's attention to Bill at the back over here and Marie over there, who both have mics. And they'll hand you the mic if you have a question. Now I'm going to ask each person to introduce themselves and their organization before they ask their question. Thank you so much.
Rob Benzie from the Toronto Star is going to ask the question. If somebody else doesn't ask to. Yes, sir.
Darren McDonald. I work with Gerdau Steel Company here in Ontario. I really appreciate your perspective of taking credit for where Ontario is, especially with the phase out of the coal plants, et cetera, that we will continue to pay for. I think that's an excellent perspective to take with the federal government. The other perspective I've been trying to discuss with the federal government is, rather than trying to, if we're trying to reduce emissions, you could look at some Ontario industries, like the Ontario steel industry, that has the lowest emissions on the planet, the lowest emissions per ton of steel produced. And if you really want to reduce the amount of emissions on the planet, you want to make more steel here. And that perspective has not been even understood by the federal government, although we've been trying. So I think it's an important perspective. This has to be done with the right lens to make sure that we do support the environment and the economy. Be glad to talk to you more about it.
Sure, thank you. And it's I'd agree with the statement in terms of the lack of focus. When you think about the cost from a carbon perspective, in terms of the production of a ton of steel in some of the jurisdictions that our industries compete with, and then you think of the cost of bringing that steel to Canada, it really, it's a carbon accounting is a bit of a mysterious thing, but it's fair to say that we need to be mindful of that. We also need to be mindful, in Saskatchewan. I mean, one of the reasons, the people have said, you guys need to have a plan, and of course that's why we're going to have one. But most governments took a year or more to put a plan together. We've had the benefit, of course, of learning from many other jurisdictions here in Canada and elsewhere. But in Saskatchewan, one of the approaches that they've taken is to focus on, with their larger emitting industries, how are they doing globally? How do they compare internationally in terms of emissions? And so that has allowed them, again, to balance that competitiveness issue with legitimate reductions in GHGs. But it's an excellent point. Thanks. Cynthia and I met at the GO station during the campaign, so.
First, I've heard you speak to this emissions reduction fund and partnership with the private sector. Perhaps you could provide a little more
Sure. Sure. When during the campaign, we talked in our platform about an emissions reduction fund, but it is the real question, and it's a question we're still answering, and will be answered in the plan, is what model do we choose that's most effective in terms of reducing greenhouse gases and spurring the kinds of investments that we think will be effective. You have different options. You have something, the Australian reverse auction model was actually something that really just drives out the lowest possible priced reduction of greenhouse gas. So it literally says we're putting this much money up for auction. How much, and if it costs $10, $5, $15, until we've run out of money, we're going to pick all of those options. This is versus some of the programs and things that we saw that coming out of the previous government, where frankly there were reductions. I remember my favorite was the electric school bus program that was being funded by Cap and Trade, where it was almost $4,500 a ton to reduce greenhouse gas. So that's one model. The New York Green Bank or other green banks take a different approach. They're really around targeting sort of where in the capital stack could the province invest to help technologies just get over that hump. There's many other tools, of course, that governments have besides just the capital they apply to it. So we're looking at all of those options to see what's the right blend. Of course, our principal objective being that this is, our plan is pretty straightforward. We're trying to reduce greenhouse gas, so we're going to look for the best opportunities at the lowest price to do that, but we're going to be mindful as well that there's some great technology opportunities, there's some great ways that we might be able to spur that kind of investment. So you'll have to wait for the plan for the final, but there's a range of things we're looking at under the fund area.
Mr. Minister, Joe Hariska, Canadian Plastics Industry Association. Good to hear you speak, and I'm sure there's many people in the room that really love your message. Just wondering what you're doing to educate Ontarians about greenhouse gas reduction. It would seem our Prime Minister and our Minister of Environment federally have forgotten about the huge investments you talked about, from the blue box to shutting down the coal plants, all these things we're paying for. So we're given no credit for these things we've done over the last 20 years. Ontario's been a leader. So most Ontarians just hear you say, we're not going to have a carbon tax, and some agree, some don't agree. So is there an education program to say what we have done to avert all these carbon emissions over the last 20 years, not just the federal government talking in the last few years?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Joe. I guess there's education on a couple fronts that I am careful to call it education, because I think if I've ever said that to one of my constituents, they might not like the way that sounds. But people are pretty smart, and there's one thing that people do appreciate, and I think we can't say enough times. And my colleague Minister Wilson talks about this. We remember when Ontario was one of the very leading jurisdictions in important metrics like GDP per capita GDP. This is something that we all remember quite fondly. But we remember it because it isn't true today. When we think of places we are competitive with, and I use that in quotes, places New York is third in GDP per capita. California is 9th. Ontario is 46th. So one piece of education that we think is very important, and it's one of the reasons we have a huge focus on competitiveness, is that we all need to understand that today we aren't where we used to be. Now, this is not solely the result of those investments. That would be much overstating it. But we do need to realize that if we want to return, let's just say to the top quartile, not just the top 10% in GDP per capita, which is a pretty accepted measure of economic success, then we need to be mindful of the things that we can afford to do and how we do them. So there's an education that is ongoing. I use that word advisedly. But people are needing to understand that is where we are. Now, starting from where we are, we do have a lot to be proud of. We have a lot to be proud of in terms, and not obviously just conservative governments, other governments in terms of things like shutting down the coal plants. It is the argument, frankly, for a Made in Ontario solution. We have one of the cleanest electricity grids. That gives us options. I wouldn't presume to tell the minister in Alberta how she should do her job, but they still burn coal there and in a lot of other places. So they have different choices. So I think this next while is going to be an education. I think this is an issue, frankly, that's going to continue to get litigated in the courts. We've certainly talked about it, no doubt, right through to the federal election. And I think that is going to be very one long process where, through discussions and debates in places like the Empire Club and elsewhere, people will measure all these things and decide whose solutions make the most sense.
One more question. Peter Love, adjunct professor, York University, and chair of the board of Ontario Climate Consortium. Very interested in your comments on conservation, energy conservation, and being the most efficient. So that's a great recognition. And so, as I think you know, in the throne speech, it referred to electricity, reducing electricity bills, not rates. And there's two ways to reduce a bill. Yes, the rate is one way, but the actual consumption is the other. I just, with your new title as Minister of Environment Conservation, I really encourage you to take on the leadership role within your government for being a leader in conservation, all forms of conservation, air, water, land, and energy. I think we need that leadership from your government. It's an important part of the puzzle, as you know, from your work at CivicAction. So I'm encouraged by that, and I wish you all the best, and we'll look forward to working with you as you move forward. So thank you for your time today.
Very much. Thank you. It is I'll tell you, I mean, back to, and I appreciate the opportunity to say this, is, when you are thinking about what we're going to do, I get back to those three objectives, right? Affordability, competitiveness, balance. So very much in the way that you said, solutions that, particularly in that case, deal with affordability for families are going to be solutions that are welcome. I know in this room there's many, many people with very good ideas. And as I said, we'll bring out our plan later next month, but we will be working then to implement it. So we do hope we get the chance to work with all of you and think about those three priorities, because those are always ideas that are going to resonate with us. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to invite Pat from Bruce Power, Pat Delzelda from Bruce Power, to come up to give the thank you remarks to the Minister.
Thanks a lot, Kent, and thanks to the Empire Club and all the sponsors for organizing today's event. It's obviously an important discussion, and thank you, Minister, for your time today and insight into how Ontario will demonstrate leadership in protecting our environment. We very much look forward to your Maiden Ontario plan on tackling climate change while ensuring our economy remains strong and that Ontario is truly open for business. Finding a balanced solution that puts people first through job creation, makes life more affordable for families, and takes Ontario's role in fighting climate change seriously. It will not come with quick fixes or short-term solutions. Ontario is a global leader in emissions reduction. With your support, Ontario is undertaking a multi-year effort to refurbish its lowest cost, non-emitting electricity resources that will not only decrease the average Ontarian's environmental footprint, but will also result in a significant financial benefit to the province. So thanks again, Minister Phillips, and we look forward to working with you to find new and innovative ways of protecting our environment while keeping our costs down for customers. If we could have maybe one more round of applause for the Minister for today.
So finally, some upcoming events. Next week, we have the Honourable Peter Bethan-Falvey, President of the Treasury Board, on November 7th. Thank you. Is there any actual tickets left to that event? Marie? Is there any? Yes, there's a few. There's only a few. We should auction them off. There's only a few left. But there is literally only a few. So, and then Joseph Mancinelli's here. That event is sold out, and that will be next week as well. And then, of course, December 6th, obviously the minister going to be speaking with all the other environment ministers on November 24th. So December 6th is just following that. So that is also a very interesting time to have a speech. So we'll be here, and you heard this news today at the Empire Club of Canada. Thanks for coming.